Thank you for joining Jennifer Shelton Associates and our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are held every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on our YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email her directly with the contact information you will see on the last slide. All right, just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C. based firm and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us. We have an upcoming event in August that you can find more information on this link on the slide or also on our website. And we now offer advertising in our newsletter and in our webinars, so you can contact me if you want more information. And our webinar today is sponsored by AccuTrack, and here's a short message from them.
AccuTrack Consulting and Accounting Services is an 8A WOSB CPA firm committed to supporting entities to sustain growth in government contracting. Our outstanding DCAA accounting solutions reduce audit risk, improve cash flows, and give you peace of mind. Contact us today to learn how we can enhance your DCAA accounting efforts.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Our speaker today is Mary Beth Bosco from Holland & Knight. Thank you for joining us, Mary Beth. And we are going to be covering NDAA 2019, what it means for defense contractors. And I want to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay, can you put up the next slide, please, Mallory? As Mallory introduced me, my name is Mary Beth Bosco. I am with the Holland & Knight Government Contracts practice. And today we're going to talk about some of the highlights of the National Defense Authorization Act. The NDAA is annual legislation that specifies programs, pay, policies, etc., for the Department of Defense. It, for example, will set forth the number of submarines, for example, that the Navy can purchase. It has provisions on military pay. It has provisions on military organization, military housing, etc. Section 800 of the NDAA governs acquisition programs. It's been around since 1961. It is must-pass legislation. The Authorization Act passes first, and then there's an Appropriations Act. And because the Department of Defense is so important, it never goes into the next year. It pretty much always passes. So, for example, last year, the NDAA for 2019 passed pretty early in the process, followed by the Appropriation Act. So that is why DoD was not among the agencies that were shut down during the shutdown. Next slide, please. So each year, the NDAA is usually a mixed bag of good news and bad news for contractors. On this slide, I think I would characterize as good news. The micro purchase level has been increased. If it is below $10,000, if an item the government wants to purchase is below $10,000, they don't have to go through competition or any of the typical FAR requirements that you'll see when competing for a procurement. Another change, which I think will be helpful, is that the NDAA requires DoD to come up with recommendations to ensure that the past performance of subcontractors and joint venture partners is a clear portion of the award evaluation when you were talking about construction contracts and architect and engineer contracts. I think many contractors are frustrated sometimes because RFPs are not always clear as to whether or not the past performance, say, of their larger subcontractors or joint venture partners will be included in the evaluation or not. It's a subject of multiple protests, either arguing that it should have been or, arguing that too much emphasis was given to the subcontractors or joint venture partners. So this will help to clarify that it is only for these two classes of contracts, but very often what you'll see is that 1 year's NDAA then gets expanded in the next year. So the 2020 NDAA, for example, might expand this past performance evaluation provision to other types of contracts. The next change that I think most contractors will be happy to see is that the 2019 NDAA continues chipping away at the use of low price, technically acceptable procurements. This year it's a little bit different because it lays out specific procurements for which use of this procurement method is prohibited. In past years, it has given general directions that for example, LPTA shouldn't be used when the specifications are not detailed enough. But this year, DoD is now prohibited from using LPTA for IT, cyber, systems engineering, professional services, personal protective equipment, and knowledge-based logistic or training services outside of the U.S. I think that is good news for most contractors who have never liked the LPTA method of procurement. Next slide, please. I think this is probably bad news for most contractors. And again, this NDAA continues a trend we've been seeing with past NDAAs, as well as the Section 809 panel that is supposed to be recommending ways for DoD to streamline its acquisition process. There is a clear target on the back of contractors who lose a protest at GAO and then file again at the Court of Federal Claims. Now, when you go to the Court of Federal Claims after a GAO protest, it's not like an appeal process. The Court of Federal Claims, or COTR, is not reviewing the GAO's decision. It is reviewing de novo, or completely new, the agency action that was the subject of the original GAO protest. It shouldn't come as a surprise that government agencies are not fond of this two bites at the apple protest process. But the surprising thing is that in many cases, if a case is lost at GAO, it is won at COTR. And I think one of the reasons for that is because if a contractor does that, they're pretty confident in their case. They're pretty confident that they should prevail. And so most protests that go to COTR after GAO have a pretty solid basis for the protest. There's also a provision in the 2019 NDAA that by the end of this year, DoD must develop a plan and a schedule for an expedited bid process for DoD contracts that are less than $100,000. I think that, again, this is something that probably will be expanded in years to come, and it will expand to other types of procurement within DoD. And DoD may have its own bid protest function by the end of the day. Next slide. The changes to commercial items in the NDAA is I would put in the good news bucket. It is trying to expand the definition of commercial items and use them in more procurement. To take a step back, a commercial item is basically an item that is not used for governmental purposes. This is the old definition, and that is offered for sale to the public or will be offered for sale to the public. What the 2019 NDAA does is it clarifies commercial items in that it splits commercial items between commercial products and commercial services. And it also expands the definition in that before this, items that were sold to state or local or foreign governments were not counted as commercial item sales. So for example, a company that might sell protective vests to state or, sheriff's offices, local police offices could not claim those were commercial sales for purposes of fitting the definition of what a commercial item is. The NDAA has changed that and now counts sales to other non-federal agencies as commercial sales. It also makes clear that items or services that are not yet available in the commercial marketplace, but will be available in time to meet the delivery date, can also be classified as commercial items or products. The reason contractors would want their services or items to fall within the commercial items, commercial products, commercial services definitions is that the clauses and the slowdowns and the compliance requirements that you see in a typical government contract are much less in a commercial item contract. And DoD is undertaking a project right now to identify which FAR provisions can be added to the list of clauses that should not find their way into a commercial item practice. So in summary, it's really a way that the government is trying to act more like the commercial marketplace and not let all the FAR clauses and requirements deter good companies from contracting with the government. Next slide. I think this is a good news slide in that contractors that are owned by a foreign entity right now have to get a special type of process to mitigate foreign ownership by virtue of an agreement with the Defense Security Service. One of those methods of mitigating foreign ownership is a special security agreement. And a special security agreement will actually dictate the composition of the board of a U.S. company that is owned by a foreign entity. It requires outside directors to be approved by the the Defense Security Service. Contractors have to have a technology plan. Their board must have a government security committee, and those companies must submit annual compliance reports to DSS. One of the real bane of the special security agreement is that for many companies with foreign owners, having an SSA, in order to bid on a DoD procurement or really any procurement, they have to obtain a national interest determination as a condition to being able to bid on the contract. Now, agencies are pretty good, for the most part, in issuing a national interest determination or NIDs because they realize their time is a is in essence if what you're talking about is bidding on an ongoing procurement, but it's another step, another hindrance for these companies. So I think that will be seen as good news. I don't know if it will actually increase the number of foreign-owned companies who want to do business in the United States, but I think it will help companies that are owned by countries who are considered our allies, such as France or England, to bid on government contracts. So I guess that's good news for them, perhaps not so good news for domestically owned companies. The Defense Security Service, like DCAA was several years ago, is falling far behind in processing security clearances. So the NDAA requires the Department of Defense to think about whether it is feasible to expedite the clearance processing for mission critical programs. So again, it would put certain programs at the top of the queue for security clearance purposes. We'll see how that falls out. You could see many debates about what is a mission critical program, et cetera. Next slide, please. The small business provisions, I think, are good news for small businesses. The Department of Defense is to establish a 15-day payment requirement for the government and prime contractors to pay small businesses. This actually used to be a requirement, and it is now apparently coming back. The Small Business Innovative Research Program is a program for small businesses that allows them to get funding to develop ideas, turn them into prototypes, and then hopefully commercialize them. Only certain agencies are allowed to participate in these programs. DoD is one of them, and the program has now been extended through 2022. In addition, the Department of Defense must implement a small business strategy to provide a unified management structure covering small business programs, manufacturing and industrial base policies, and procurement technical assistant programs. I quote that from the Act because I really don't know what that means. I don't know if it means DoD is supposed to now have a separate division that only deals with small businesses, or whether it's supposed to tie together certain programs. So I think we're all going to have to wait for this one to come out in the wash and see what actually comes of it, if anything. Next slide. The miscellaneous slide that I'll conclude with is, I think, a hodgepodge of things that are not particularly good for the government contracting community. The first one up is addresses the situation where the government and a contractor have a dispute over intellectual property rights. So say the government believes that it has unlimited rights in tech data, but the contractor believes that it only has limited rights. If there was a dispute over that in the past, the government would forego using the data or exercising its unlimited rights until there was a decision on the dispute. Under the 2019 NDAA, the Department of Defense is allowed to use the disputed IP during the pendency of the litigation, which, when you think about it, probably makes the litigation moot in many cases because the IP will already be out in the public marketplace. The next change relates to IDIQ contracts with specific job categories and labor rates associated with the job category. Under this change, if you have an IDIQ contract and compete for individual task orders, the agency will not need to consider price in award decisions for those task orders. So in other words, they will be based on technical merit, past performance, management, any non-price evaluation process. I think, I'm not quite sure again what the motivation for this was, because you would think that the agencies would want competition at the task order level, but I guess they're going to try it this way. The last thing that I want to talk about, because I think it is somewhat alarming, is that the NDAA contains a provision that allows DoD to develop its own process to limit or ban foreign companies or U.S. companies who are using foreign parts from doing business with the federal government. It's a little bit like a de facto debarment, and what we don't know is what process DoD is going to put in place, whether, for example, there'll be a notice and an opportunity to appeal, or whether it will be something that's pretty opaque to the company that is being banned from competition. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Mallory, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for sharing your knowledge and insight today. Today's presentation has been recorded and can be found on our website or YouTube channel within about 48 hours. If you have a question about today's topic, please contact her at the phone number or email shown on your screen. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar.